A mercy mission was sent from Saigon in the hope of rescuing women and children. Those on board had no idea what they were flying into.
It was deserted. The entire base was, it was like a ghost airport. It was the weirdest, and that's a really busy airport. And there was just nobody. And then suddenly out of the revetments where they stored military aircraft came thousands. I mean, it was like a horde of ants or bees coming out of a beehive. Well, they were soldiers. A few women, but basically all of them were soldiers that wanted out.
As soon as the rear stairway was lowered, the stampede of terrorized people tried to storm the plane. From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control.
If you were one about to get on the steps, you were lucky to make it up the steps of the aircraft because the guys behind were shooting, and they were shooting to kill. They were knocking women and children aside. They were using their butt of the rifle. It was chaos, absolute, total chaos.
Several times the pilots moved the plane, hoping to break the crowds around the rear ladder. There was no control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The stewardesses dragged people on and rushed them to seats, screaming all the while, "Where are the women and children?" They piled 4, 5, and 6...
That is when the aircraft started to move. I know we ran over people, because you could hear the screams.
Angry men left behind fired pistols and automatic weapons at the plane, determined that no one would go if they couldn't. As the plane strained laboriously into the air, people were still clinging to the wheels on the rear stairs. 7 men fell off as the plane reached heights of 1,000 feet or more.
And I remember this woman, she went off first, and she actually waved to us. It was bizarre. She waved goodbye, doing this, at 3,000 feet. I mean, I don't know that she had any inkling that she was falling to her death.
With the airport closed, the docks now became crowded with Vietnamese civilians trying to get out. But once again, South Vietnamese soldiers would do anything to save themselves.
This ship was half full of the military and half full of civilians. The military were afraid that scattered among the civilians were Viet Cong. So what the military were doing, they were going and they were rounding up all of the young Vietnamese, and they were, in some cases, making them jump over the side of the boat. And in some cases, they shot some of them. The Vietnamese were totally out of control. Our military people were totally out of control.
Among the refugees were hundreds of Vietnamese who worked for the Americans. It was they who were in the greatest danger if captured by the North Vietnamese.
I was the only American left, and I was at the evacuation point with all of these people. So we had all of the aid people that had not been evacuated assembled in a hotel, and it was my job to try and find some kind of transportation to have those people evacuated. I remember that our big boss came in on a helicopter, and the helicopter landed in front of the place where these people were assembled. But I was told to walk to him very slowly, shake his hand, and get on the helicopter, and don't look back and don't say another word. And I, of course, balked because I was responsible for these Vietnamese that I knew couldn't get on this helicopter. So I got on the helicopter, and as we got on the helicopter, the helicopter immediately started to leave the ground. I felt terrible because I was responsible for those people, and not only was I responsible, but I personally knew almost all of them from being at the embassy, at the consulate in Da Nang for so long. And I was really, really upset. But I was told by our biggest boss that to get on the helicopter and don't even look back, just get on the helicopter and don't say anything.
Thousands of refugees left behind fought their way onto barges escaping the city. They hoped to reach Saigon, where they thought they would find safety. Crammed onto boats with little food or water, hundreds died making the 3-day journey. The fall of Da Nang had turned into a human catastrophe.
Da Nang was a huge shift in the pendulum in, I think, all of our thinking. Da Nang not only fell, but if you recall, Da Nang fell ingloriously. I mean, that was a hectic evacuation. And I think it set up the great fear back in Saigon of what fear could do to the Vietnamese community.
Da Nang was a terrible warning of what the future might hold for Saigon. But although the North Vietnamese were getting ever closer to the city, Ambassador Martin refused to consider an evacuation.
I didn't see any indication that he was insane, but I would say that he was obsessed with the virtue of his mission beyond the point where he could make competent decisions. I think right up to the very end, he was thinking they were going to hold. I don't know when it was that Graham Martin ever reached the conclusion that it was going to fall.
The embassy painted the rosiest picture you could ever imagine. They're fighting well, they're strong, they're courageous, they have the country's interest at hand, and they can turn the North Vietnamese back, and they're in great shape.
A week after the fall of Da Nang, the war came to Saigon. A South Vietnamese pilot defected. He abandoned his mission in midair and bombed the presidential palace.
And about an hour after the bombing of the palace came the imposition of a 24-hour curfew. It was announced on Vietnamese radio and on loudspeakers very noisily in the streets in the center of Saigon itself. When the announcement came, people poured out of the shops, the offices, the businesses in the center, and they're now jamming the streets on their way home. It's absolute bedlam.
Washington wanted to know the mood of the city, but official embassy reports only gave the good news.
I got a phone call at my villa one night from State Department. They said, look, we don't trust the reporting coming out. Would you please send us separately a telegram describing what you see as the psychological atmosphere there on the ground, in the embassy and out on the streets? And I said, I'll do it. I'll file it through my USIA channel. I said, but 24 hours, Graham will have read it, and that'll be the last one you're going to get out of me, only because he will have stopped me. We need that. So I filed it. The last line, as I recall it, of the cable was indicative of all that preceded it in the cable. There is fear out there bordering on panic.
Out in the country, the North Vietnamese advance continued to within 30 miles of Saigon. Thousands of refugees came flooding into the city. They brought with them tales of atrocities committed by bloodthirsty communists.
The rumors at that time was, okay, they are coming in and they rape, and I heard that there's where rape happened, that they would pull out the fingernails of women that who have their nail painted, and that they would executed people that who work for the Americans.
In spite of the rumors, Kim stayed at her post. She had absolute faith in the Americans.
I am surrounded by my American friend who keeps saying to me that we would never leave you, and the U.S. government would never leave you. We will stay here with you until the end. They believed that Saigon would not fall, and if it fall, it would be a long time. But no one ever discussed like the possibility that the American would drop us. I think they're afraid to bring it up to us too, because there was fear that they would cause chaos in their company. People would flee them. All of these, of course, they may be, I didn't know then, but maybe they was under the pressure not to say anything that would cause panic, because they was constantly assuring us, you will leave with us if it happened. But the fall of Saigon won't happen so quickly.
The Americans were haunted by the events at Da Nang. If the same panic engulfed Saigon, it would be many times worse. Publicly, the embassy encouraged the view that no Vietnamese need leave Saigon.
One of the principal things that we had to do was to avoid doing anything that might create a panic and therefore make it impossible for us to go ahead with evacuating either Americans or, for that matter, Vietnamese. So the governing principle was, yes, do things in time, but do not do them too quickly, not too soon.
But many Americans and some Vietnamese with money or the right connections were now leaving the city on commercial flights. Sensing the Americans might abandon them, fear began to take hold of the streets of Saigon.
I would get back to my villa late at night or whenever, and there would be 15, 20, 25 people outside the gate. They'd come in and, you know, you're the minister for this, and we've been loyal to the U.S., we're in sensitive positions, please get me and my family out. And you would say, we can't. And they would fall sometimes to their knees. And when I use the word grovel, I mean that's what they did. And they would say, never mind me, get my wife, my children, my mother, my father out, please. I think it's the worst thing emotionally that I've ever encountered. As an adult, dealing with other adults who thought you were some kind of a power bastion that could save them from one of their worst fears. They saw us as what we were, the power. They knew we were the power behind whatever government was then in office, and the next one and the one after that. They knew that we were the financial providers, if you will, of the economy, and they knew we were powerful. I can think of no other episode during what was for me the worst 9 months of my government career, for a lot of reasons, not just the eventual outcome. I can think of nothing that hit me with the wallop that did.
Pressure was growing from Washington to begin an evacuation. A North Vietnamese victory was now looking inevitable, and they wanted all Americans out of Saigon. But Martin was still resisting an evacuation. He cabled the White House, warning them that angry South Vietnamese would turn on the Americans for abandoning them.
One thing that would set off violence would be a sudden order for an American evacuation. Of one thing I am certain, deadly certain. If U.S. armed forces come in here, they will be fighting the South Vietnamese on the way out.
But Martin may have had personal reasons for staying. To leave would be to admit defeat to the communists, something he could never accept.
Il avait un fils qui avait été tué pendant la guerre au Vietnam. Et c'était un élément psychologique très important. Et jusque presque au dernier moment, il a cru que la situation pouvait se renverser, et que les choses pouvaient continuer. Et que finalement, la politique américaine au Vietnam serait un succès.
In Saigon, the word on the street was that a communist assault on the city was not far off. The disintegrating South Vietnamese army shored up Saigon's defenses in a desperate attempt to save the city.
I have a little bicycle and I get on my bicycle and just ride around the city and just experience the panic of people, running around.
Fear and panic are swift-moving emotions. People panicked quickly in other cities like Hue, Da Nang, and Nha Trang. They could panic quickly here if they sensed the North Vietnamese were moving in on Saigon. The difference is, this time, that from Saigon, there is no place left to run.
Basically, I cannot think of any way to leave Vietnam. I was 16 and always been sheltered my whole life. My family been taking care of me all this time. And boom, right now they cannot do anything and I feel powerless.
C'était une situation très, très angoissante. Parce que Saigon était menacé de deux événements qui pouvaient être tragiques. D'une part, une anarchie complète, avec des bandes de pillards qui auraient assassiné des étrangers, qui auraient pillé. Le deuxième danger, c'était la bataille dans Saigon. Parce que il y restait au moins 200 000 ou 300 000 hommes armés dans Saigon même. Ces gens auraient été plus ou moins obligés de se battre. Et les forces nordistes auraient été obligées de les bombarder. Et Saigon est une ville fragile. Et en plus de ça, physiquement, c'est une ville qui grouillait d'enfants. Ça m'avait frappé. Vous voyez des enfants partout, n'est-ce pas? Parce que c'est le climat, les enfants qui jouaient dans la rue. Alors, l'idée qu'il y aurait, dans cette ville surpeuplée, qu'il y aurait des combats, était une idée à faire frémir.
The deteriorating military situation was too much for Washington. They feared Americans might become trapped in the city. Martin was ordered to begin evacuating Americans and their dependents. Desperate Vietnamese looked for any connection to the Americans to get out. All over the city, quick marriages were arranged.
I remember it very vividly because you had to get married at a police station, and the police stations at the time had concertina wire and sandbags and machine gun nests on the top of them. So you went over there with an American and a Vietnamese witness. You would sign the paperwork. You would pay the person extra money so that they would rush the paperwork through. And we got married.
With an airlift now on, the processing center at the airport became inundated with Vietnamese hoping to get out.
Started off with just dozens, and then became hundreds, and then became thousands of people that were queuing, you know, to get screened, to get interviewed.
It was panicky. The people were apprehensive. The Vietnamese, when we were there, they didn't like to wait in lines very much. So they would push and prod, try to get ahead of the line. When they opened that up, I took my girlfriend and my 3-year-old stepdaughter over there, and it was still a long, drawn-out thing. It was an all-day event.
Patraz was luckier than some. He was spotted by a fellow Marine working at the center.
He came up to me and he said, "Sergeant Potratz, there are some no-shows on some of these flights. If you want, I'll see if I can put her on some of these flights." He came up to me and he said, "Okay, she's on the next flight out." He picked up her suitcase, put my little 3-year-old stepdaughter on his back, and he rushed up to the plane and put him on the plane and got him out of there. And he was my hero that day. I'll never forget that.
The process was a little more complicated for those Vietnamese not married to an American.
Each of us had to fill out the application, and the people who have seniority would leave first. I was told that when the time to come, they would come and collect me. Make sure I leave the address and have someone at the time, all the time, so they would come and collect me.
I mean, I actually had a family come in one time. I remember, I think they were Chinese, Vietnamese. There must have been 75, 100 people in this one family. But in the Asian and Vietnamese family context, you know, they didn't make these fine distinctions we made between immediate family and a family. You know, the extended family was all family. There was no such thing as family, non-family, you know, your immediate family and then your distant family. And I mean, this is a Western concept.
I was told I could leave if I would take only 2 younger sister and brother. But I have my family who could just leave your parents, especially in Vietnam, and I was single, so I lived with my parents all my life. I couldn't think of the thought that I would take my 2 youngers and get on the plane and leave Vietnam, not knowing what would happen to my parents, and how could I? So I decided to stay so that I could take all of my family, so they kicked me further down on the list.
Over the next week, thousands of people were flown out of Saigon.
The number of sorties from Saigon to Clark Air Base has soared to 100 a day. It's a 5-hour round trip with the airlift suspended each night. The majority of the evacuees are Americans and their families and dependents. In less than a week, the number of Americans in Vietnam has dropped by more than half to below 3,000.
Nothing is more devastating than you come into work and you know that your boss left. and not even a word to say goodbye to you, to tell you I was leaving. And you felt betrayed. You felt betrayed, and you resent that kind of treatment. And then two of my co-workers who were there longer than I am just disappear. And you come in and the desk just empty, and you have to support consulting them on some of the paperwork, and they disappear, and they left already. They left last night. And not even a word to say goodbye.
Well, the last few weeks of April, when we find out that the American and all the people that work for them leaving, that make us very resentful and hate them, because we always thought that they were going to fight with us to the very end. And you know, for a lot of us, we do believe them. You know, I mean, why not? At that time, we believe America is the most powerful country in the world. And, you know, they can send people to the moon, you know. Why not, you know, beat the communists? And, or at least, you know, guarantee that they're not, you know, invading us. And, yeah, so there's a sense of, very strong sense of resentment toward the American. But under all of this is a sense of like, okay, I wish we can go to America, you know. And so it's a very strange feeling for us, because we hate them, but yet we want to be like them.
President Thieu appeared on television to address his people. Ambassador Martin had convinced himself that the communists might negotiate if Thieu stepped down. So Martin told him he had to go. Within days of his resignation speech, Thieu had left the country. The North Vietnamese were waiting on the edge of the city for fresh supplies for the final assault. Saigon was theirs for the taking.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. I wore black and he wore white. He will always win the fight. Bang, bang, he shut me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang.
At night, the evacuation of Americans and some Vietnamese continued.
My baby shut me down.
At night, that's where the worst part. At night, because I live right near the airport. So I could hear the truck or the bus transporting people who was about to leave, evacuate from Saigon, because they would not move those people during the day, fearing that they would cause chaos in the city. And I could hear the plane taking off, and deep down inside me, it was, it just so, the despair was so great that I cry at night. I cry a lot at night.
Some who had more intimate connections to the Americans also made it to the airport.
I remember one night we went to one of the bars in Saigon, and we loaded up about 10 or 20 young ladies there. And we had vehicles that had light bars and sirens. And we had what we called a war wagon. And we drove up in the dead of the curfew in Tudo Street, opened up the doors, put the girls in, ran lights and sirens, and went right through the gates at Tan Son Nhut, and nobody stopped us.
Some night we don't have electricity, right? So we just have those oil lamp, and I remember the food everything is scarce, so we only eat rice mixing with a lot of different kind of grain, and we eat fried peanut. We have peanut and a lot of fried pumpkin. Because pumpkin lasts for a long time, right? The whole family huddled around, and they had this little oil lamp. It's all dark, and we eat our dinner and we talk and we get scared. We pray. But at that time, I guess the whole South Vietnam assumed that they all get killed. The sense of fear is overwhelming everywhere. And we talk about, who get to go, who get to stay. So, yeah, for me, I'm thinking about, go to America many times. I wish I can go. For me at that time, I guess it's the safest place on earth that you can go to. Not only that, it's a place that you can do whatever you want to do. Just the picture, the image of America is like heaven. Yeah.
We still hope that the international community would not drop us. Millions of people who did not like communists. We still believe that there would be some kind of thing work out, so that maybe there was a part of South Vietnam, maybe 1/3 of it, or maybe just Saigon, that there's a place for us. That's what we were hoping.